You know, as you know, that EGROW Foundation is a research-based policy think tank located in NCR, and we believe in policy-oriented research on mainly contemporary issues. It was in that very context that about 2.5 years ago, as COVID set in, we started our webinar series, which has been very helpful for policymaking and to scholars, and not only in India, but even in neighboring countries. We have also been very fortunate to get scholars, professors, policymakers from across the world. We had a good blend of Indians and foreigners presenting on this forum. We have also had the good luck to have two Nobel laureates come and speak to us. With that brief introduction, let me move on to the context of today's webinar. The last two webinars we had done on union budget, expectations in Northeast, in general expectations, and today the budget is with us. And the same team is joining us today, which had joined us last time. We have Dr. Ravindra Dholakia, professor at IIM Bangalore, chairing the session. He himself is well-known fiscal expert. Dr. Surjit Bhalla, who's a former executive director at International Monetary Fund and former member of the Prime Minister's Economic Council, is with us. Professor Upinder, who's from the Department of Economics, Punjab University, and she's been on our forum earlier, is also with us. Professor Gayithri from ISEC Bangalore, and now as a consultant at Fiscal Policy Institute, has joined us. She was there last time, but before we could give her the time to speak, she had to rush back from the meeting. Mr. Ajit Pai, who was earlier with Niti and now is working with EY, the strategy lead partner, will be joining us shortly. And Mr. Pinaki Chakravarti, who's the former director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, will also be joining us shortly. Dr. Dharmakirti Joshi, the chief economist at CRISIL, will be providing us the market view. I don't see Dr. Joshi. No, he is there. So Dr. Joshi is also there. With this, let me hand over to Professor Dholakia, the proceedings of the session and conduct of the discussions. Professor Dholakia.
Thank you, Dr. Charan Singh. It's a pleasure to again have all of you in this webinar. Without very elaborate kind of introduction or anything, I would just request all the 6 speakers that we have today to confine their comments to something like 8 minutes. And I mean, we hope to have some question answers at the end. We have altogether total time up to say 6 o'clock. We'll try to finish within the time. My request to all the speakers is that the budget proposals and everything is fairly well understood by now. But if we have any specific things, any important kind of the insights into the things, into the calculations or into the implications of the budget, that may be really focused on rather than repeating what are the proposals in the budget. That is probably well taken, well read, and we can skip the duplication. With this thing, I invite Dr. Surjit Bhalla for his presentation or his comments.
Yeah. With your permission, sir, I would rather come near the end. I'm much more comfortable after you, and then happy to
all
do
right,
so.
all right. I appreciate. I think because your views are likely to be at a sharp. I understand. Okay. In that case, shall I request Professor Upinder Sawhney?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Dholakia. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay. And thanks, EGROW, for having me again on this panel. As we all know that the budget has been not only presented but well read, as Professor Dholakia already mentioned. It's a welfare-oriented budget with something for all sections of the society. And we all know that the focus is on green and inclusive growth. Now, the most important aspect of the budget, which we had spoken about and were expecting earlier last week when we were speaking to each other here, that there's been a substantial increase in capex, which is likely to improve growth, create jobs, and encourage private sector to perform better. In the backdrop of an expected slowdown in global growth, increase in public expenditure is a desired counter-cyclical policy. This has been further supplemented by the proposal to create urban infrastructure development fund for tier 2 and 3 cities, which will ensure the benefits of infrastructure development reach everyone. And further, it has been supplemented by a substantial amount for upgrading railway infrastructure. So all in all, this budget is really high on capex, and this is likely to have a positive impact through the multiplier effect on the economy. Now, one important area which I felt has been touched upon is the tourism sector, taking into account that the tertiary sector had slowed down. This will boost the tourism, and the finance minister said that tourism promotion will be taken on a mission mode with active participation of states through public-private partnerships. And 50 destinations will be developed by taking care of all aspects in a tourist destination. Now, one sector which really needs to be rejuvenated and which still has a dependence of more than 50% of the population, that is the agriculture, has been given a prime importance as expected. Now, some of the long-standing needs of agriculture have been addressed. The government plans to set up a large number of multi-purpose cooperative societies, primary fishery societies, and dairy cooperative societies in uncovered panchayats and villages in the next 5 years. This supplements the cabinet decision to set up 3 new cooperative societies to boost organic farming, seeds, and exports to increase farm income. A lot of tax benefits for these cooperatives to ensure their success in ensuring an uninterrupted supply chain and income support to farmers. Agriculture Accelerator Fund is being set up to encourage EGROW startups in rural areas to bring innovation solutions for challenges faced by farmers. Now, this is going to have a very positive impact. And the proposal for increase in storage capacity for agricultural commodities with improved infrastructure like cold storages and better logistics, this is something which has been lagging for several years now. And of course, the focus was also on developing India as a global hub for millets. And I'm happy that she has announced a support for research and development. Agri research and development is really required at this point in time, though this is going to be focused only on millets, but even then it's a welcome step. Of course, there's been a focus on pushing digital infrastructure in the farm sector. However, there has been 6.8% reduction in allocation for the agricultural sector and 12% reduction in Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. This is something which probably should have been addressed in a better way, because we cannot afford to reduce the allocation for the agricultural sector in any manner, especially when it is going through so much of distress. There are a number of fiscal experts on the panel. Even then, I'll just touch on the fiscal front that the finance minister has made an effort to create fiscal space by reducing food, fertilizer, and petroleum subsidies by a substantial 28%. This is in line with lowering fiscal deficit target for macroeconomic stability. Of course, rationalization of the new income tax regime. Now, reduction in fiscal deficit to 5.9% of GDP is well taken. However, I feel that she emphasized that the target of reaching 4.5% by 25-26 will be achieved. This seems a bit difficult to me now. Last time I had also said that I expect that there will be a focus on green growth. And of course, we know that there are multiple programs which have been announced to help the economy to move towards green economy. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you, Professor Sawhney. You have kept your time very well, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
May I now request Professor Gayithri?
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening. Thank you, EGROW, Professor Charan Singh. You always make a part of these important discussions. Professor Dholakia, thank you very much for the leads that you have given. Professor Charan Singh, I'll turn off my video because both get interrupted. There is a problem of my audio and video not going together very well. I'll turn off my video and then just speak. Is that okay with you, sir? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity given. And yes, as Professor Dholakia said, these budgets have already been well analyzed, interpreted, and then there is also a response from the stock markets and everything. So we have seen the impact, the short-term impact, and we are yet to see the long-term impact as such. So I'm going to take the advice of Professor Dholakia and not repeat the proposals which have been announced by the Finance Minister. Rather, I would like to definitely touch upon some of these in the context of what exactly it's going to have or mean for the economy in the long term as such. So keeping this focus, I was trying not just limit to this present budget, basically try and examine whether budgets in India of late have been having a continuity in policy intervention. Are the budgets becoming a standalone kind of presentations with a focus on one particular year, or do we have some kind of continuity in the policies with a long-term focus? That's one approach that I have taken to analyze the budget. And the second one is what kind of intervention, what kind of investment is proposed by the government in this current fiscal. And again, what kind of implications it will have on the long-term impact on the growth and other objectives that have been announced by the government. And the third important aspect, how integrated is the approach or how coordinated is the approach? Are we talking about each sector and each intervention as again a standalone piece? Are we trying to put together, knit together everything and then sort of attempt an overall development as such? And the last one is how exactly these are operationalized. Okay, how each of these interventions or strategies are operationalized by the government, again, which is very, very important, and operationalized and also sustain the initiatives in the long run as such. So these are the four broad approaches I'm looking at to analyze the budget. And of course, the finance minister has clearly emphasized on the focus, the three focus areas: youth to fulfill their aspirations, impetus to growth and job creation, strengthening macroeconomic stability as such. Okay, so I was just talking about how continuity, whether there is continuity in the policy intervention. I've been studying the last few budgets. What I find is the focus on growth and inclusive welfare, which the government has been talking about for the last couple of years, is something which is continued, which is a very, very good thing for the economy to sort of have a focus for development as such. And, this is where I sort of talk about the four opportunities that she mentions again: the economic empowerment of women, then the youth kind of the skill, PM Vishwakarma Kaushal Samman, and tourism, and green growth. These four opportunities she uses, and how well these are knitted together is something which I thought I will talk about. Basically, like when you're looking at the approach which is being taken, The recent paper by Professor Charan Singh and the policy paper talks about how labor force participation in India is very low, lower than that of even Pakistan and Bangladesh. The proposals which are made in the budget, economic empowerment of women, where she already talks about the achieved status, current achieved status, we have 81 lakh SHGs. Basically, how exactly this is going to be made into a sustained effort, talks about basically having a larger producer enterprises with thousands of members and managed in a professional manner. And this support from the government is something not by way of freebies. They are talking about efforts to sustain the initiative which has been made by the government to empower the women by way of supplying the raw material, better designs being suggested, quality being focused, branding and marketing. I thought these are interventions where we address the need of promoting economic growth, which, it's accepted sort of theoretically. There has been a lot of literature which has talked about women's participation in enhancing the growth of GDP. And there is also evidence that women's participation in labor force has not only been low, but also declined over a period of time. How exactly this can be improved and sustained in the long run? So what I feel is the kind of support that has been provided by the government is something which not only addresses the short-term need of the society, but also sustains this effort in the long run. And the second important opportunity that she has taken by way of PM Vishwakarma Kaushal Samman. Again, here, this is about sort of not only retaining the traditional craftsmen's skills in our society, but also enhance the scale, quality, and reach of their products by integrating them with MSME value chain. So here again, the focus is not just providing a kind of a temporary support, but the support is to provide advanced skill training, knowledge of modern digital techniques, brand promotion, linkage with local and global markets, digital payments, and social security. And this is where I bring in the third aspect of operationalizing. How is the approach being integrated across all the departments? Like one of the major initiatives is to propel capital investment. Also, because in view of the shying away of the private sector and promoting private investment, government has continuously increased the expenditure on capital heads, which has actually, I have the numbers also, I don't want to go into the numbers. There is a substantial increase in the capital investment made by the government. How is the government trying to trigger this PM Vishwakarma Kaushal scheme? It has been sort of linked with the conditional capital interest-free loan support, which is extended to the states, which was just 1 lakh crore last year. It has been increased to 1.3 lakh crore. One of the areas identified is the Unity Mall, where the Unity Mall is a kind of sort of where the state governments will be encouraged to construct and maintain this Unity Hall, where the products, one village, one district, one product, or the handicrafts which are all these traditional kind of products which are produced in a particular state are being promoted there for sale and also for furtherance of export and like promotion of these products in the particular state as such. So this is where I find that it's not just listing one particular in the objective in some sector and leaving it to fend for itself, but then bringing in states also to invest in this particular area so that this effort becomes a sustained effort. And again, to this, tourism is also being included. So this is another activity which has been roped into this. So what I find is whatever proposals which are being made, it's not just a kind of standalone interventions. The government has tried to use the proposals which are made for the different departments to make sure that one is linked with another, and then there is a sustained intervention which happens in the long run. So I find this to be a very good initiative at this juncture, because we need to not only promote growth but also sustain this in the long run. And what are the kind of the 7 priorities are listed? I am not going to list them out. The focus again is on to sustain the effort, the capacity building and the skills. So basically the research and development focus, which is there throughout all the sectors, sectoral promotion activities that have been suggested by the finance minister. It's there in millets research, medical research, ICMR labs, high-end manufacturing and research, teachers training, skilled manpower and training, capacity building for civil servants. And there are 3 centers of AI which have been talked about, lab grown diamonds. So what you find is basically when I talk about all this, it's a kind of all the sectors which are trying to sort of, where the government is trying to instill these skills and capacity building, again, in such a manner that the effort to develop is achieved in a sustained manner rather than, sort of have a short-term gain in this. I think fiscal consolidation has been referred to by earlier and then by Sawhney as such. But then, yes, certainly, I think the effort is good. Fiscal consolidation. I'm not only referring to the overall fiscal deficit, I'm talking about the quality of fiscal deficit. It's very, very important to note that the revenue deficit, which used to be as high as 65%, about 2 years back, has been now proposed to be brought down to 49%. And she also talks about another important concept. Not only the capital investment is pegged at 10 lakh crore, but also if you bring in the effective capital expenditure, it goes up to almost 13%. It's not only the initiative by the central government, the states are also nudged to promote capital investment so that in the long run, we sort of achieve the growth that we have been anticipating to achieve. One last and most important thing I wanted to refer to is a very, very interesting proposal that she makes about financing some select schemes based on results. I think all of us know that we've been using input-based kind of financing of programs as such. She talks about financing select schemes to look at, sort of results as the focus rather than on the inputs. My only submission is, instead of looking at select schemes, although it is on a pilot basis, in the long run, eventually the government has to extend this to all the major programs, so that I think we cannot really limit our interventions based on the inputs or the financial allocations made by the government. But I think we need to ultimately look at the outcomes that are achieved and the ones to be achieved. That is when we'll be in a position to make informed decisions. So overall, I'm not really going to touch upon the tax proposals. It has already been mentioned. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Professor Dholakia.
Thank you, Professor Gayithri. Now, shall I request Dr. Dharmakirti Joshi?
Thank you very much, Professor Dholakia and Dr. Charan Singh for inviting me again. So I think I'll speak about a couple of things. I think first thing when we look at the budget is we look at what are the assumptions? I mean, are they realistic or not? So I think on that front, one of the basic assumption is on GDP, which they have assumed at 10.5%, which I think, as per our assessment, I think it is feasible to get that kind of nominal growth in 23-24. For reference, I think last year it was, or this fiscal year, the GDP growth nominal was 15.4. Before that, it was 19 point something. So clearly, I think the nominal, from the nominal perspective, growth is coming down, and I think this is budgeted correctly. And I think the fiscal consolidation path is also as per we were envisaging, because if you have a target of 4.5% by 25-26, then you have to keep the pedal on consolidation. And I think, and the target is quite stiff. I mean, as Professor Upinder was also pointing out. So I think, so this is again, I think from that perspective, fiscally responsible. Divestment, I think I'm a little disappointed, because I think we've continuously failed to achieve targets, and I think we are now beginning to set lower targets, I think, which is, and in this environment, I think you need to have more revenues, and the non-tax revenues also become a source of that. I think the big hit of the budget is on the capex side, and I mean, no matter, last year I remember there was a lot of confusion. I think people were saying you take the budgetary capex, or you take the money given to the states, or you bring in the PSUs. This time around, I think there is, no matter how you look at it, I think the capex has grown pretty fast, and I think it's the key item of this budget, which has where the focus is. So in a sense, I think the government is trying to promote growth over the short run as well as the medium run, because all these segments where the capex is going, these are high multiplier effects. I mean, as per the RBI study done some time back, so they will have a spillover effect in the short run and the medium run. So promoting growth, and then I think via growth creating more opportunities rather than directly giving a consumption boost. I think that is a very clear signal, and this kind of gels with what the RBI would have liked, because I think the consumption boost would have again been inflationary, and I think particularly from the core inflation perspective. And I think let me end by saying that, well, what should we watch out for? And the strategy of funding capex is exactly same as what it was in the last budget. I think if you take, but what played out was completely different. So last year also in 22-23, it was envisaged that we'll cut the subsidies, we'll cut the revenue side of the spending in some parts, so that we get money for capex. And the assumption was that the nominal growth will be 11%. But what actually played out was completely different. And I want to highlight the fact that the environment today is, the global economy is slowing, but I think there are a lot of frictions which can create problems from the perspective of commodity and crude prices, which continue to be volatile. I think if there is a spike like last year, I think your subsidy bill will be difficult to sustain, particularly for fertilizers, I think, given the experience of last year. So I think that is one risk from the global side that needs to be watched out, because the strategy is entirely based on expenditure restructuring to fund the capex. I mean, so reduce the revenue spending, push it to the capex. So any threat from the subsidy side, which is getting reduced, I think can play a spoil sport. It did play last year, but you got revenue kick because of higher nominal growth. So I think that's one point I wanted to make, that in an uncertain environment, you will have to be very nimble in your approach, the point that I made last time also. So let me stop here, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. You have kept the time very well. Now, I would rather like to know whether Mr. Ajit Pai has joined.
Ajit has not joined so far. I'm going to ring them up. Neither has Pinaki joined. I'll just message both of them and find out. Okay, but in the meantime, we can proceed with Professor Surjit Bhalla if he is okay. Yeah, Professor Surjit Bhalla.
Thank you. Absolutely okay. Thanks. Let's recall what we all were saying, almost just a week ago. And one of the words mentioned most prominently in the newspapers, in the media, by the experts was, will this be a populist budget? I haven't heard populism for the last 3 days. Nobody has mentioned this. So I think that's a structural, but perhaps not structural, but that's a change that we should applaud. That given the high expectations of populism, election year budgets, etc., that the budget turned out to be extremely well crafted, in my view and in the view of most, stuck to the knitting, stuck to what budgets should be, and did it very, very well. So that's the first big point that I want to make. One of the genuine positive surprises, other than expected things turning out like CapEx, but even CapEx, the size was a little bit of a surprise, is the first reduction in import taxes that one has seen since 2014. Either they've stayed the same or they've bumped up. And it's too early and the data is not there, but I would suggest that all of us or whoever has, works out the weighted decline in, or some kind of a comprehensive measure of how much tariff reduction has taken place. So I think I would be looking for that number, but in any case, it is very, very welcome that this decline has started. Then, direct taxes, so the fiscal deficit, I remember I was in the camp that really didn't care whether it was 6.4 or 5.9, but rating agencies and experts and I guess conventional wisdom demands that we stay on a fiscal path. And in that sense, the budget really achieved that. They had to do some reasonably hard calculations as to what to sacrifice and what not in order to stick to what they had stated, which was 5.9. I think there's another trend happening over the last 3-4 years, particularly in this regime post 2019, that the government is being rather conservative in its forecast. And I think I want to just take a moment. I think it's a very, very welcome strategy on the part of the government to come out with conservative forecasts. And then you say effectively that, look, we beat the forecast. So you lower the expectations maybe, but I think it increases confidence in the government. So from a strategic point of view, I think that is extremely welcome and in one sense, very forward-looking. Along the same lines, what we have is that our taxes have done rather well. Tax collection, that is, have done rather well. And what they have is an elasticity or multiplier of just 1 with GDP. And I think that's also an indication. So next year when we are here, we discuss, but that's also an indication of where they're playing very, very conservative. And I'll be very surprised. Let me put my cards on the table. I'll be very surprised a year from now if the elasticity is not significantly higher than 1. So this is, we suggest that they will exceed the fiscal deficit target, and they are already containing expenditures. So in that sense, it's also very, very welcome. But I think these are the larger points that we should note about our budgets. All of us have followed the budgets in India for the last, some of us longer than others, but for the last 10 to 20 to 30 years. And this is the first time in the last few years where one is seeing a real conservatism and greater disclosure in what the budget numbers mean. So I think full marks on there. And I think, the larger picture where it emanates from, I think, is from a confidence. And this is reflected in our foreign policy. This is reflected in various aspects of India's stature, movement, relative standing, etc. That, there is a genuine confidence about the economy. And therefore, once you have that confidence, you can think more objectively in terms of what to cut or what to increase. Now, in the media, much was made, and this is again an indication of how perhaps good the budget was, that there was very little criticism of the budget. Normally, there was a significant amount of valid criticism. And this time the criticism was that and others can chime in, oh my God, that the allocation for Narega has gone down or is kept the same at 60,000 from 89,000. Now, as we all know, it's a demand driven. So I felt that either, and I feel that either the critics should say that, listen, the demand for Narega is much more than what the government is paying for. So it is something illegal that they are doing. They are supposed to satisfy the demand. So what is this hanky-panky that the government is doing? So if the argument had been that, then I would have felt reassured that the critics had done their math. But it doesn't seem like the critics did their math by only picking on this one little aspect that this had gone down. So all in all, I felt that all the right buttons were pushed. And it seems to be well thought out. There is this question which one of the, or maybe more than one person has raised as to on the disinvestment side. And I myself was surprised that there wasn't a step forward, given that we now have indications that Air India is going to reach a profit at the end of this year. So that is victorious for the government in terms of the disinvestment policy. So I would have thought that maybe needed some, and I think it's of interest to find out why they did not do that. And if anybody can comment on that, that'd be useful. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bhalla. I think you have many other things to say, and you are holding it back, I understand. So, Dr. Charan Singh, what is the progress on the two gentlemen?
I have sent a message to both of them. There's neither a blue tick nor a response. So
Okay,
we'll wait,
so
but I know they are going to come back to us soon as the meeting gets over.
okay, so in the meantime, shall we invite the questions, or how do we go about? Because my understanding is that it is 5:10 roughly. So we have
Professor Dholakia, you yourself are a very good fiscal expert. And before we get into question answers,
Sure.
we would all like to be listening to you.
Okay, okay. But I'll not take a long time because, that is not my role anyway. Let me start straight away with the observation of Dr. Joshi, and supported by Professor Bhalla, that why is it in this budget, if you see some disappointment, then that is the disappointment on the part of the divestment proceeds. They are only budgeting at 61,000 crores, which is just more or less the same amount as you have realized in the revised estimates for the current year. Perhaps the reason is that this is the last budget before the election, and they don't want to create the kind of feelings and opposition on this issue, because this is a very sensitive matter for anybody who is employed in the public sector, that if whenever they want to be shifted to the private sector, or having the disinvestment kind of things, there is always an opposition from the union, and this is probably not the right time for them to really start pushing that thing forward. That is one understanding. That is my understanding of the political economy of this country. However, I would rather like to focus on something more important and serious. Dr. Joshi argued that assumptions have to be considered very, very critically. And he seems to be feeling, and of course, Dr. Bhalla also said that conservatism is a good strategy. I don't know, whether conservatism as a strategy is the basic thing that you follow in the budget making. Budget making is a sincere and honest exercise. If it no longer remains honest, it is a problem. But anyway, what I'm saying is that all the speakers without exception, all the four of you have clearly mentioned that capex is the major point in this budget, that the capex has been increased to something like 33%, and as Dr. Joshi has very rightly pointed out, whether you take it as a pure capital outlay or you take it as a effective capital outlay, including the grants given to the states for creating capital assets, or you consider the public sector enterprises also in their capex thing. No matter which measure you take, the capex have increased more than 30%. In fact, my calculation shows that the capex is increased from 10.5 trillion rupees effective capex to 13.7 trillion rupees, which means roughly from 3.86% of the GDP to 4.54% of GDP. It is almost 70 basis point increase. It's a significant increase. And all the other speakers have also pointed out that these are the things which are likely to create a lot of multiplier effects. The multiplier effects of this capex is very high, as some of the researchers have said. Now, if that is the case, where is the provision for that in the real growth estimates and assumptions that we are making? Our real growth estimate has been kept only at 6.25%, which is almost 7.75 basis point less than the current year. I don't see any justification there. Secondly, what is important is that the inflation estimate is targeted only at 4%, which is not what is likely to happen, because the consumer price index forecast for the whole year on an average is likely to be more than 5%, not less than 5%. And that means that the WPI inflation estimate over the whole period is only taken to be something like 3.3, which is extremely conservative. I mean, I don't know whether WPI inflation in this regime will turn out to be 3.3. It's as Professor Bhalla had already pointed out last time, inflation, particularly WPI inflation, is a global phenomenon. Is affected more by the global factors, and global factors, I don't see that it is likely to result in 3.3. My understanding is that the WPI inflation and CPI inflation have merged and are likely to be in tandem for some time, barring some of the base effects. If you are doing that, then it is likely to be around 5%, which implies that your estimate of the nominal GDP of 10.5 is a gross underestimation. Gross. That means it is likely to be around 12%, 12.1%. So we are likely to be in for the surprise like this year in the next year also. And if that is the case, whatever kind of the conservative estimates that they have put in terms of cutting the expenditures, certain very critical expenditures can be taken care of. Now let me come to the critical expenditures very quickly. The critical expenditures that they have reduced, because as I was saying, committed expenditures are extremely relevant. In this budget, for the first time, the committed expenditure as a proportion of GDP is now, when you also add defense in that, is now actually less than the revised estimates by something like 91 basis points. This is significant. And it is the committed expenditures which are being reduced by that much. This is something which implies And as a result of that, non-defense discretionary expenditures have increased by 50 basis points. That is how you have achieved a 0.41% basis point reduction in the overall expenditure. Now, how have we actually gotten into this kind of thing? The cut of the committed expenditures include something like 50 basis point cut in the pay and pension of the government. Sir, this is surprising. In absolute terms, the numbers are 5 trillion in the current year revised estimates to 4 trillion in the next estimate, in the budget estimate, which is not likely to take place. I mean, this is not, given the unions and given the labor laws, this is not possible. Similarly, the food subsidy I take as a committed expenditure because there is a food security act. And now in that context, what I'm finding is that food subsidies have been cut in absolute terms by 0.9 trillion rupees, which implies that it is in terms of the percentage of GDP, it is almost 40 basis point reduction. That itself, 50 and 40 makes it 90, and 91 is an overall thing. Sir, this is how we have cut the things. These are the slippages likely, and you have provided for that another 150 basis point of the growth underestimation. That is how the budget math has worked out very well. I think that in the overall situation next year when we meet, probably we will find that again you have had the fiscal marksmanship very well done, because the fiscal deficit of 5.9 is likely to be achieved, but with higher absolute numbers. This is my understanding of the budget. The rest of it is already said. I would stop here. Again, ask if anybody has joined. Yes. I think Professor Bhalla can.
Yeah. Following on, how do we square the circle between the GDP, nominal GDP estimate, real growth, and inflation? So here's my forecast, which is how it'll happen. So you said 10.5. I think the nominal GDP, where I agree with you, is going to be higher than 10.5. It's going to be 11.5. So the breakup in my forecast is that inflation will be 4 and growth will be 7.5, which is
that is fantastic.
Yeah, which is consistent with the expenditures, the capex and everything else that we know, and consistent with global trends in inflation. So only if the global trends in inflation, as you know, I mentioned last time, I'm a big believer that inflation is determined outside of national borders. And I think very likely that 23-24 is going to witness a move back to normality, in which in our case is about 4% CPI. And in any case, the GDP is a function of deflator, not the CPI. And as you yourself, Chairman, have discussed, and I have, etc., the deflator is a little bit less than the CPI, or certainly moves about 0.5 to 1 percentage point less. So adding all of that up, that is how the circle will be squared between nominal, real, and inflation.
I have a minor disagreement. I will fully agree that the real growth cannot be 6.25% as assumed. It will. I had already considered it at 6.8 as the economic survey predicts the upper bound. I'm more optimistic about 7.5. but I wanted to be conservative as well. Anyway, the point is that I fully agree that GDP deflator is a weighted average of the CPI inflation and WPI inflation. It is not necessary that it should always be less than CPI inflation. It would be between the CPI inflation and WPI inflation, with the weight of this WPI inflation to be 70% and CPI inflation to be 30%. This is the normal math. So if you are considering this thing, 4% is not a normal inflation in India. Sir, the normal inflation in India is 5.5%. If 5.5% is there, the growth is likely to be maximized in the long run. Anything less than 5.5% inflation is a growth detrimental kind of thing. We are sacrificing growth in the long run. In fact, if you look at your own research and everything, you have not found any causality or any kind of things between lower inflation and higher growth. In fact, it is the other way around. In fact, when the inflation starts coming down, you are finding that the growth is also sacrificed. I think this is the kind of, at least recent phenomenon says that this is the case. Now, my understanding is, I fully agree that the 10.5% is an underestimate, gross underestimate. It is likely to be around 12%, if not 12.5%. I think this is where and Dharmakirti has raised the hand. Yeah, please.
And I just wanted to add a bit. I mean, the reason why I think the deflator will look lower next year, I think one of them is that WPI, there's a very strong base effect. I think you got abnormal increase in WPI. So if WPI inflation comes at 3%, I would not be surprised at all. I mean, and actually in the first quarter itself, I think you'll see WPI come down quite sharply. Because what has happened is, sir, the global prices are still high, but they're lower than last year.
True.
So the inflation is, I think, so there's a downward trajectory to that. Just wanted to add that. I mean,
no, Dharmakirti, I fully agree with you that there is a strong base effect for the WPI, but that strong effect will last only up to the June, July. Thereafter, in fact, the year is thereafter also. And sir, at that point in time, you are going to have a higher prices, higher inflation. I think we can't be highly optimistic about the sanity prevailing in the global arena. I don't think that. So, anyway, are there any questions from the floor?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. Both Pinaki and Ajit have come back that the meeting is going on and they are sitting in the front row. So therefore, they are not in a position to come out, though they have spoken what they wanted to speak. In any case, I'm still waiting. We have half an hour and I've told them,
okay,
we still have half an hour. You can come and come and
sure.
share. In the meantime, I had a couple of questions and Professor Dholakia, you take a call if you want them to be collected and then you go to the panelist. But my question was, I looked at the...
We proceed one by one and therefore, you prioritize the questions.
Okay, so my one question was, Professor, the budget has provided continuity that has been stressed here also, but going forward in the medium term, because you have said, others have said, it's pretty futuristic in terms of capital expenditure, which has multiplier effect and has long-term implications. And the capital expenditure has been large on railways. It's been on tourist spots. One of the panelists mentioned about it. There are transport hubs being created. There are 50 helipads and related things, heavy on infrastructure, and coastal waterways are also being generated. So what would be the view that what is the growth rate trajectory that you would or the panel would be watching for the next 5 to 7 years?
May I ask Professor Gayithri to respond? Professor Gayithri? I think she is not there. Uh, uh, Dharmakirti, you would like to respond?
Yeah, I think, sir, yeah, sure. Our growth forecast is 6.5 to 7% over the medium run. I think this is roughly the same which as the pre-pandemic decadal average, which was at 6.7%. Now, there are three drivers of long-term, medium-term growth. One is capital, the other is labor, and third is efficiency. On the capital front, I think we've already seen a lot of action. The government is focused on investment. States are supposed to backload. I mean, they couldn't front load. So the hope is that they will now, and even the private sector is coming back in parts, although it is not fully. The animal spirits are not back because of uncertainty. But it is coming back in terms of they have to. Some of them have to green their processes. So there is, I think, some tweaking on investments going on. Steel and cement are very closely linked to your infrastructure development. So obviously they get fired up very quickly. So there is, full private sector capex is not there, but investment as a percentage of GDP rising means that we are now beginning to see an inflection point on inflation, on investment, and that could probably be, I believe that with this kind of policy, which has spillover effects for the private sector, which crowds in private investment, you will see capital support. So capital is, I think, is going to support over the next 4 to 5 years. I'm pretty, I would put my bets on that. On the labor front, we have the numbers, but the quality is an issue. I think so the budget also makes an attempt to skill and at the lower end so that people can be absorbed. But the issue is we've been talking about it for so long. So I think the numbers, but the ability part, I think is somewhat of an issue. On the efficiency front, digitalization, even infrastructure investment promotes efficiency because the turnaround times, everything improves. So I would say that the contribution of capital probably will be the maximum, and then I think followed by efficiency, then followed by labor.
While I agree with the broad kind of thing, but what you have missed out is that we have crossed the threshold limit on urbanization, and therefore the progress on the urbanization front is likely to be phenomenal. The current budget also provides enough infrastructural support for that. The moment urbanization proceeds very rapidly, which is likely to happen in next 5-10 years, this is going to be the trajectory. Automatically, the efficiency index, if you are properly measuring it, will show a very substantial rise. Therefore, while capital is likely to be the leading source of growth in the acceleration of the growth, I would say the efficiency is also not going to lag behind. It is also going to take up a very, very significant thing. Labor's contribution in the acceleration of the growth is likely to be very minimal because of the problems that you have mentioned. But in any case, there is going to be acceleration. And I don't go by the past pre-pandemic thing because you never had this kind of infrastructural support coming in. This kind of crowding in of investment likely to happen. The kind of investment rate increase is not happening. Therefore, my expectation, I strongly differ from the economic survey assessment. And my assessment is that in the medium term, at least the potential growth rate is likely to be 7.5 to 8%. And thereafter, it may continue to be 8% or more. I think that is the kind of trajectory that we are talking about. I don't think that we are stuck to 6.5%, which the economic survey is trying to argue that our trajectory is likely to be for 6.5% in the medium term. No. Professor Bhalla, any comment?
No, global growth is also, I was in an earlier discussion on inflation, and we're truly in a globalized world now. And global inflation will dictate Indian inflation, and global growth will dictate Indian growth. In other words, above or below, let's say 6.5%, 7%.
Last year of
Even
the
the
school
IMF has
and the
now
best day
turned
of the
out to
grade.
be more bullish on global growth than they were a couple of months ago. And if you look at all of the indicators coming out from various other countries, that their growth is less, more than that was projected, even it might be negative. So I think, 23 is going to be a very interesting year for us as well as for the rest of the world. My own bias is that it'll be back to what we were before, low inflation and reasonable growth. In India's case, hence the forecast of above 7% on GDP growth. And mind you, in the olden days, 7% GDP growth meant 5% per capita growth. Now 7% GDP growth means something like 6.1, 6.2% per capita growth. So I think we are hitting a sweet spot globally and an especially sweet spot in India. So I think the fashion will be that the Goldilocks that everybody talks about is going to be in India. One, as an aside, since we all follow the forecast, and obviously this affects sentiment, but I was just looking that the Hildenberg report had said that the Adani stock was something like 85% overvalued. If you look at what has happened to Adani Enterprise stocks, it's down about 85%. So I think by another forecast in terms of confidence is that the whole Adani stock vulnerability of the Indian market episode is close to the end rather than the beginning. So that combines with, I'm sorry to say, but that combines with a very bullish expectation for the Indian economy.
I myself, Professor Dholakia, thanks for getting this inputs. My own feeling is that we should be on the upper threshold for some of the reasons which you mentioned or Professor Bhalla mentioned. But the digital leap which India is taking, I think is going to contribute significantly there. So I myself look at, as Dr. Bhalla says, the bright spot or the sweet spot on our way now in the next few years. There are a couple of questions which I thought are interesting. And one of the questions is on pensions. And I think it's a genuine concern by one of the scholars here who is saying that most of the states have opened up their old pension. And they have moved out of the new pension schemes. So this is going to be really stressful. Any views on this? And the second question is on Indian agriculture, and this is a question from Tanushri Haider. I can read it. I thought it's a good question. Indian agriculture majorly suffers from supply side bottlenecks like lack of irrigation facility, low productivity, etc. However, the focus of budget is more on marketing and improving the supply chain. In your opinion, what would be the long run implications for agriculture sector? So there are two questions, one on pension, one on agriculture.
May I request Professor Upinder Sawhney to talk about agricultural question first? Professor Upinder Sawhney.
So insofar as agriculture is concerned, there are a lot of things that are expected to be done in this budget. And that is likely to strengthen the supply chains as well. But one thing which is creating a little bit of stress is that the increase in, decrease in fertilizer subsidy and petroleum subsidy is likely to affect the cost of cultivation, and that may hinder the process which is expected to be smooth and which is likely to be smoothened further as per this budget. So there are certain good aspects of agricultural strengthening in this budget, but then there is this, I really don't know at this point that how much effect the reduction in fertilizer and petroleum subsidy is likely to have on agriculture. But it is very important for us to have a robust agriculture if we have to look at the growth of the other sectors, because ultimately the demand for the products and services of other sectors is resting on more than 50% of the population, which is still dependent on agriculture.
Yes, Professor Bhalla.
Yeah. Again, I'm sounding a little bit like, everything is coming up roses, but let me just comment on fertilizer subsidies. That have gone down, but the question is, to what extent is it because of a decline in fertilizer prices internationally? Same thing with respect to oil. So I think, both of them, so it may not have an effect on fertilizer use in terms of quantity or even the rate of growth of fertilizer, but your subsidy will have to, if it declines and the fertilizer prices are declining, then that's what is accounting for it. But I haven't looked at agriculture in a long time, but I would think that is, or maybe it's my DNA bias, which is leading me to infer a positive outcome. But any comments on as to how the relationship between fertilizer subsidy and fertilizer use quantity?
Okay, Professor Gayithri.
May I say something? Hello.
No, just yeah, Avinash, boliye.
Yeah, I am Ashok Vishandas.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that subsidy on fertilizer, implicit in it, because you are giving a lot of emphasis on organic farming. Therefore, it will reduce the dependency on the chemical fertilizer, and that explains the lower subsidy for fertilizer. That is point one. Second, India is going to give a lot of emphasis on millets, which does not require much fertilizer. And that is the clear implication of this. Not that the productivity will come down or the farmer will suffer. I do not see that eventuality taking place.
No, absolutely right. But the unfortunate part is that the fertilizer subsidy is still given to the producers and not to the consumers, in the sense that the farmers are not getting it directly, the subsidy. In fact, if the farmers were getting the subsidy directly, this would have been the right kind of an argument. You are right.
No, let me elaborate on this. Even if farmers are not getting, but earlier the producer used to get the fertilizer subsidy directly, even if that fertilizer have not been sold. Now the government has done the point of sale. If it is not sold at the retail outlets, it will not be given. The point is, there will be less demand of fertilizer because of these two reasons. One is the organic farming, and other is emphasis on millets.
Point very well taken. Yes.
Yeah, and third thing is, because pulses are self-fixing urea. Therefore, the fertilizer major component goes on urea, so it does not require nitrogen fixing. So these three reasons, to my mind, explains purposely lowering the provision for fertilizer subsidy.
The point very well taken.
Thank you.
Good point. Thank you. Professor Gayithri, you are still there, or?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. By the time I got to the mic, it got,
Okay.
I couldn't reach the time.
So,
2 points.
One
thing, on the pensions, I was just wondering.
Yes,
so
I was about to tell you that please address the question on pension. Yeah.
Yes, actually, I meant to sort of reflect back on the issue of fiscal consolidation or the kind of this thing that has been achieved at the state government level ever since the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act was passed was quite actually smooth, and the states were improving their finances. I think the states achieved revenue surplus until the time COVID came
Right.
in and devastated. So
Right.
now going back to the old pension scheme, I think will again jeopardize. And as already we see that the state's revenue surplus has turned into revenue deficits again in most of the states, and sort of bringing back this kind of committed expenditure, which is going to be a very very kind of a huge committed liability on the government. That's something which has to be given a serious thought by the government. Okay, so that's I think that that's an important issue that has to be considered. And the second thing on the issue of, if I may address the question of capital investments and the growth, I'm not really going to take any call on the growth that we can achieve, but only caution that I wanted to refer to is about the efficiency gap in capital investments in India. While I did refer to the substantial focus given by the government on promoting capital investments, I think it's important for us to realize or recognize the fact that we have a gap to the tune of almost 34% as compared to many other countries, the efficiency gap. I think if at all we are planning to sort of achieve growth based on this, I think efficiency gap is something which needs to be really addressed. And also sort of making these allocations to reflect the sectoral requirements rather than just simply enhance the capital investments as such. One of our own studies, I mean, this is slightly dated, but then we sort of observed that while the capital investment, which has been attracted by the private sector as such, has definitely exceeded the required levels of investment, but it has gone into the areas which it's more than the requirement in some sectors, and some sectors the capital investments are totally starved of funds. I think that is something which the government has to definitely take care of, the efficiency gap and filling the need or the addressing the requirement of each sector. I think that is something which has to be carefully addressed even while we are promoting the capital investment as such. I think this is very very important in taking forward the growth process of the country. Yes.
Okay. Now, as far as the states are concerned, several states have started going back to the old pension scheme. Not many, but some of them, yes.
Yes.
Now, in that context, what is happening is that in this budget, the finance minister has announced that the fiscal deficit allowed, that is, the state borrowings allowed is 3% plus 0.05%. Sorry, plus 0.5%
yes,
for the power sector deficit. I think if this is the kind of the limits that they have already set, then the states who are committing to this kind of expenditures will have to find the resources. I don't think that the liability to the central government is an issue, because there is no liability to the central government if there are decisions on this kind of PF funds which are taken by the state governments. It is the state government liabilities, cannot be the central government liabilities. Okay. Now, any other questions?
Yeah, there is a question on the tax slabs, and there is also a question on the new tax regime.
Okay.
So the one on the tax slab, let me read it. I thought it was good. What is the impact of this reduced tax slabs and the earlier changes in income tax slabs was brought to bring in tax buoyancy? So how far did we achieve that? And also, is today's change really needed for the middle income group? There's a question from, I think, Dr. Tripathi.
Okay. Dr. Dharmakirti Joshi, would you like to take up this question?
Yeah, let me try to take a stab at that. So I think the change was required because in real terms the exemption limits etc. had been had gone down substantially because of inflation. So they needed an upward adjustment. The second, I think, issue is that we have seen that the inflation has hit people in general also, I think, apart from the slab issue. The lower income brackets have faced higher inflation than upper income brackets. I think this is using the CSO data. I think that's what we find. So, and I think it's also reflected in the incomes. I mean, so if you see the consumption pattern, the auto demand, two-wheeler demand is, I think, two-wheeler sales are about 0.5% lower than what they were pre-pandemic, which is 2019-20. But the four-wheeler sales are 7% higher. So I think so income bracket difference is getting reflected in the consumption. So there was need to give support to this part of the consuming class, and I think the maximum beneficiaries will be in the 5 to 9 lakh category, because below 5 lakh you could get away without paying tax anyway. I mean, earlier also. So I think this part will benefit. So this will be good for, I mean, when we look at the markets, I think it will be good for things like FMCG, which have not been doing that well. Even two-wheelers, I think it will support. So I think that's the limited point I have on this.
I think another justification, if I may say, or if I may add, is that, in terms of the purchasing power parity, if you just consider the tax slabs here and the tax slabs elsewhere, particularly US, because that is the country with which we are comparing all the time, everything, as if that, US is the heaven. Then in that case, if we consider these things, probably it is justified that we increase the tax slab to something like 7.5 lakhs or something. That is not a big problem. And as far as the new tax regime is concerned, the simplification was required because new tax slab were not effectively chosen by the taxpayers. Now with this kind of things, it becomes very attractive. Only a few individuals who are claiming the deductions of more than 3.75 lakhs, okay, they are the ones, and I'm talking about the deductions over and above the 50,000 standard deductions that we are talking about. So effective deductions of 4.25 lakhs. If anybody is claiming deductions of more than 4.25 lakhs, the old regime is still attractive. But most of the guys, most of the taxpayers would be really looking for, or claiming the tax deductions of less than 4 lakhs. And in that case, the new tax regime, the new tax slabs will be better and more attractive, rather. Yes.
There are two questions which I'm going to share with you. One is here and one I was asked in another place. The question here is, apart from increase in budget allocation for Ayushman Bharat, budget does not talk about improvement in healthcare infrastructure. Should that be a concern? That is one. And Professor Dholakia, this connects with the previous question. In one of the sessions that I was participating as a panelist yesterday, this issue came up from another professor from JNU who asked me that is this the right strategy that the central government has of nudging and saying that if you do not observe this, you will be quote unquote penalized in terms of some permission or some grant or something like that. Exactly the point that we made of 3 and 3.5% of GFD. And the professor observed that in a federal structure, the state governments should not be felt or made to feel like younger brothers and the central government like the elder brother. So what would be the view that you and others on this panel would have on these two issues?
Yes. The second issue is a more contentious issue, and we can take it later. But the first one, on the health thing, may I request Upinder Sawhney?
Yeah.
Professor Upinder, yeah.
So, Professor Charan Singh, you have rightly pointed out that one has not heard much about the health sector in the budget, and that is likely to be a problem because we still have a lot of issues regarding the uh, availability of health services to the masses, especially the lower category of people, because privatization that is taking place in the health sector is making the health services out of reach for the common person, and we need more and more of public investment in health, which of course, as you said, is missing. The emphasis is missing in this budget.
Okay. Now, regarding your second question, I think Professor Bhalla and Dr. Joshi will have their own views, and maybe I'll supplement or I'll agree, whatever. So, Professor Bhalla, his point was about, that state and central state relation, and that is the question about. You are on mute, sir.
Informed question, and broadly in terms of our the tax regime that we've talked about, as you know, the peculiar feature that we have of surcharges rather than embedded in the tax rate. And the reason we have surcharges is because of federal and state understanding or lack of understanding on how to share the proceeds. Constitutionally, if it's a surcharge, then the center keeps all the money. And this is also tied with what happened in GST, but now there was a 14% guarantee. That guarantee is no longer there. So I think this is something for the next Finance Commission to take up, that we have certain constitutional constraints or problems. Another one being on agricultural income tax. And the third being the state and center relationships in terms of economic relationships. So I think this is, and pensions obviously is the latest one in there, but there you have, hopefully, there is a constraint, or should be a constraint on how much states can extend their fiscal deficit to. So it's a very involved question. I hope we come out on the right, my own personal bias is I hope we come out on the right side on the pension. I mean, I'm very rare to think, pensions is, the old pension scheme is not a Ravindra, it's the Bap of Ravindras. And it's just very, very unfortunate that is being even proposed. And so I think we'll see how the year pans out, and hopefully there will be something in the center state rules as well as RBI as to how much the states can expand their fiscal deficit. But it is something that I believe should be arrested right away.
Thank you. Dr. Dharmakirti.
I think on the pension, I completely agree, because any unfunded liability is a ticking time bomb. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It will come to roost one day or the other. So I think so this move somehow, I think, needs to be put to an end. I mean, as far as the center state thing is concerned, I think it's a very contentious issue. I haven't done enough work to be able to comment which is right or which is wrong. So I'll not say anything about it. I think the Finance Commission probably is the right body to take a decision on this. I'm not knowledgeable enough on this.
This is exactly the point that I was saying. In fact, we can say that I don't want to comment, but my only argument is that there is a full-fledged finance commission sitting for several years, and then they take a very considered, and I'm sure on this issue there will be significant amount of internal debates and all that, and they have come to this point. The budget is only reflecting what the finance commission has already stated, that since the power sector deficits were of a special type and were turning out, because if the reforms are undertaken, it takes time to sink in, and during that time, if you want to support the states undertaking those kind of reforms, you need to provide an extra provision for the fiscal deficit. But otherwise, the fiscal deficit target is 3% for the states of their GSDP, sorry. Now the question is that this particular target is already, I mean, just to inform Professor Bhalla and everybody, that there is already a situation that, yes, the center has now accepted that the states cannot, borrow more than the 3% of their GSDP. That becomes a clear-cut upper limit for them. I mean, most of the states are supposed to have less fiscal deficit. If they are planning for more, they require very special permission, which will not be granted. I think that is the kind of, otherwise there is no way we can have the fiscal discipline in this country. It is not a question of central government alone having the fiscal discipline and state governments allowed to do whatever they want. I think that overall the figure is already there. I think we have already moved on in that direction. So I don't see any problems at all. If we want fiscal discipline, this kind of rules are required, and the freedom is there. You can spend your entire budget in say giving the pensions. I have no issues at all. But then forget about all other aspects. It is also your freedom. Now, why are you complaining? I think that is my question. That if there is an issue, then we should also take it very squarely. Yeah, Professor Bhalla.
Yeah, but so I'm not that familiar with the actual instruments that the government has. Do they have effective instruments to stop states from going beyond 3%?
Yes,
they do, and both in theory and in fact.
Yes.
Okay, that's good news. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Professor Dholakia.
Then I think the pension problem may not be much of a problem.
Yeah, it is their own choice. The only issue, the only problem is that because one state has accepted, there will be other states where they will have this kind of demands. And if that is the problem, then that is for them to really tackle. This is how it becomes sort of a remedy, and that creates the problem. Anyway,
Mr. Chairman, Professor Dholakia, I am Subramanian, retired RBI, and thanks to first to Dr. Charan Singh, of my ex-RBI colleague and a great person, economist today.
Yes.
I have a small question about agricultural sector and related rural services. The capex, we are going to have such a huge allocation under capex. How much contribution will come from the agricultural sector or impact on the rural sector and rural services as far as the capex is concerned? Again, the background of last entire 22, we found the food has been a concern globally, and also the present budget is promoting a lot of self-help groups about, especially about branding and then standardizing and then helping them with skills and other things for export promotion, mainly from the rural areas. How much you feel this capex will benefit per capita income of the rural poor and rural sector, and then also the agricultural sector? What may be their growth and contribution? How do you feel?
Okay, thank you, Doc, and Mr. Subramaniam. May I ask Professor Sawhney to respond?
Well, at this point, I cannot really say that how much of rural incomes will increase due to an increase in capex, because this is something which needs a calculation in the long run, because it's not instantly that the incomes are going to increase in the rural areas or any other area for that matter. However, the finance minister has made a provision for an accelerator scheme for startups in the rural areas also. So that is for agro startups in the rural areas. So that is likely to engage the people who are not fully engaged in, because there is a lot of disguised unemployment. So it is likely to create some jobs in the rural areas. But insofar as the the amount of increase in rural incomes is concerned, or percentage increase is concerned, I cannot really comment at this point.
Dr. Dharmakirti, would you like to add anything?
No, I think this is a little, I think as Dr. Sawhney was pointing out, it's a difficult issue. In the short run, yes, I think even manufacturing, if you take 50% of the manufacturing is in so-called rural areas. I mean, so it's not that if you're promoting manufacturing, it does spill to rural areas as well. It's not the urban areas alone. And the interlinkages between urban investment and rural are also rising. I mean, it also creates opportunities for rural areas in some sense, opportunities for people to come. I mean, even if the investment is urban centric. So I think all those possibilities are there. I think it requires more work to be able to say where we are headed. But I would say that some of the efficiency enhancing measures which were announced for agriculture, if they play out, they will support the agriculture economy. Rural, by the way, I think is is predominantly agriculture, but there's a large part of non-agriculture also in rural areas, I think, which is what I was referring to when I said that they will benefit from the linkages with the urban. So in an interconnected system, I think there are flows back and forth. But directly, I think this, for instance, in this budget, if you see the housing scheme, they have not given any increase to the rural area, but they have given a substantial increase to urban areas. Reason is very clear. I mean, last year they increased the rural spending by 60%. You can't have an increase over that. Now in urban housing construction is lagging behind, so they had to put more money here. So I think there are various ways to cut it and dice it, but I don't have a comprehensive view on this.
Also, the agricultural incentives that have been granted in this budget are more towards the allied activities than traditional agriculture. So that also needs to be looked into.
Apart from all that, Mr. Subramaniam, since you belong to RBI, you must also appreciate that these questions are better answered if there is a hard data to support. And hard data to support comes from the central, CSO, which used to be CSO, now it is NSO, which talks about the urban-rural income differentials, and which talks about urban income and rural income estimation once in the decade or something like that. Whenever there is a revision of the base year, they prepare this estimate and provide. Unfortunate part is that since 2011-12, the last revision of the base, we don't have these estimates at all. And without these estimates, it is extremely difficult to provide a reasonably satisfactory answer to your question. Is it okay? So I'm looking forward to that kind of a thing. When I was chairing the committee on the subnational accounts, I made it a point to ask every state government to prepare something along this urban-rural breakup of their GSDP. So far that is not happening, but they have accepted on principle. They have accepted.
You are
to
right.
do that.
You are right, Professor Dholakia, and that is one system where the efficiency is not being measured, and also
Properly.
that is
efficiency is not being measured for various reasons, sir. We don't also have
yeah.
a reasonably good indicator, and several of my professional friends don't agree on some of the issues. They still follow the US models, okay, for measuring the efficiency. Anyway, Professor Bhalla.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out that there is hope in the air. You're absolutely right. We don't have any survey reliable since 2011-12. And though we have a number of private surveys on the scene. Now, what is happening this year, that is 22-23 agricultural year, is that there are 3 surveys in the field. One is the CMI survey, which is continuing. The other is the NCAR panel household survey. And the third is the NSO survey itself. So I think by the end of this year, we should have substantial information on what has happened to the rural-urban income differential plus various other associated parameters. And in addition, I believe, given the controversy about some private surveys, that maybe at the end of the year, the controversy will be much less, and we will find out, effectively find out as to who's been swimming naked. So, because there's real divergence, the private surveys have estimates that are quite outside of, in my view, realistic realm, but we really won't know, and precisely because of what you said, that we have not released the 2017-18 survey. I happen to believe there are good reasons why the data was not released, but
right.
That's a debate for another day. Let us hope that this year all the data will be released and we'll be able to effectively answer. And another thing with the non-release of the survey, and this has to do with inflation as well as the weights that we use to measure CPI inflation, they come from the surveys.
Exactly.
So we are working with an ancient survey, 2011-12. And we're all basing, including the RBI, sir, we're all basing our estimates of what the inflation would be on a consumption pattern that may very likely is no longer that valid.
Correct.
So I would, another suggestion to the RBI is that you move towards, in any case, the consumption surveys are there only once every 5 years. Hopefully in the future, it'll be once every 3 years and eventually once every year, like in the US. But before we wait for that moment, why doesn't the RBI work on some kind of a chain weighted chain weights on using the PDF, using the price deflator? This preoccupation that we have to have a CPI, then why ever have a PDF? I mean, I don't quite understand. I mean, this was in the olden days. Even in the olden days, all countries around the world have much more detailed information on the price deflator than they have on the CPI.
Right.
And we should remember that the leading country in terms of measurement, sophistication, etc., namely the US, bases its consumption estimate, bases its price estimate on the consumption deflator. And we are using the CPI. So let's hope.
But Professor, here is a point. During the A few years ago, in the last century, that is 21st century, last century, RBI was having a developmental role, especially towards agricultural sector and all that. And we had all types of surveys and other things. And then RBI has been having a special research department, agricultural credit department, etc., in which I also have been involved for several years. But then subsequently, the board has been taken away, and then RBI is now a skeleton, monetary policy and regulation and then supervision authority mainly, and then having given up much of the developmental role. So in that event, RBI is only a analyzing authority of data available to it.
Mr. Subramaniam, with all due respect, I think this is a completely different thing, and it is a lot of debates and a lot of differences can occur on this. So let us put it aside. I think we have run out of the, we have exceeded our time limit. So Dr. Charan Singh, over to you, sir. You are on mute.
Yes. So thank you very much, each one of you, for such an excellent discussion on the budget, a very seasoned discussion, something away from 2 days have passed by. Everybody has thought through the budget, digested it, and then brought all your views, and that's why the discussion was so rich. On that contentious issue that came up, I thank you, Professor Dholakia, to mention it. My own view was that at the end of the day, in the federal structure, there's not a story of a big brother, young brother, but at the end of the day, the way our structure works, the government and the union government has to bail out anything and everything, because everything stops there. And therefore, if they have to own every such decision, obviously, then sometimes they have to share some reasoning and nudge the states to follow. But I like the way you put it, that the fiscal discipline has to be maintained. And in the government borrowing program, if the states are exceeding certain limits, I think the center can refuse further borrowings. That is why the control mechanism is in the fiscal deficit. So I think we have covered many issues, including some sensitive issues in today's discussion. I'm sure everybody has benefited. I have been reminded of this issue of fiscal discipline thanks to you, Professor Dholakia. Our discussion of today, as well of last week, will be available on our website by tomorrow. It'll be available on our website tomorrow. So you're welcome to use it, share it. I think because of the richness of discussion, I am prompted to share it with many of my friends. Next week, we are going to continue with our journey of the budget and the fiscal policy. We will come back to you. The time will be the same, 4:30 to 5:30. We will discuss and we'll further delve deep into what this budget is all about and how the center-state relations get engaged in the budget and the Finance Commission. We will be talking about those issues, and we'll be making an announcement by Monday or Tuesday about the speakers that we have at that point of time. With this, let me thank Professor Dholakia for chairing the session. I also want to thank each one of the panelists for being here with us, and each one of the participants who have asked questions and enriched the discussion here. Thank you very much, and see you next week. Thank you.